Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our chief medical examiner and senior analyst, Kenneth.
And to quote the late, great John Denver, "Take me home, country roads." We got West Virginia, the Mountaineers, on the autopsy table right now. And let's take a look at this team, because this season left a lot of questions for me. And we're going to start with, from a betting standpoint, this team's season win total back in June was 6.5. So, as we've always said, that hook will either help you or take you out. And in this case, absolutely took you out if you took the over. So, fell short of that expectation. Now, when we look at our composite win total based on 3 very specific criteria, this team we had at a 4.8. So they exceeded that expectation for us only because we didn't have that great of an expectation for this team going into the season to begin with. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. How was your strength of schedule and your strength of record? Those two things are very much correlated for us when we're separating these teams out. So your strength of schedule, you absolutely can control that to some degree. Who do you put on your schedule? And then how do we power rank your opponents? So that's your strength of schedule. Your strength of record, this is what you cannot control. How well do your opponents perform throughout the regular season? So when we look at West Virginia's strength of schedule, 0.523, the 20th toughest schedule in the FBS last year. When we look at their strength of record, basically your opponent's winning percentage, we are at a .553, 54th out of 134 teams last year. So this team not only faced some highly ranked, power ranked teams for us last year, but those opponents absolutely performed week in and week out. We'll get to those numbers here right now. So, key takeaway: West Virginia exceeded our expectations only because we were well below where the market had their win total set at. The Mountaineers found success in a strong rushing attack, but struggled defensively, particularly against the pass, which limit their ceiling. So let's take a look at the caliber of offenses that. Let's take a look at the defenses that this offense went up against last year. And the baseline that we like to use here is 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams when you include the Power 4 conferences and Notre Dame. So how many of their opponents were inside of that power ranking number of 68? If you're watching on YouTube, I want to say thank you for joining us. If you're streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunchtime VIP, I want to also send a special thank you to you as well. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, thank you for joining us. And I will go through those numbers right now. But before I do, let's just take a look at their opponents' win-loss record. As I mentioned, their opponents getting it done week in and week out from a win-loss standpoint. Absolutely. Penn State was 11-1 in the regular season. Pitt was 7-5. Iowa State was 10-2. Kansas State was 8-4. Baylor was 8-4, along with Texas Tech being 8-4. So this team faced quite a few teams there with winning records last year. Now let's get back to the power rankings. How many of those teams were inside the top 68? Penn State was the 19th best defense last year. Pitt was 56th. Kansas was 41st. Iowa State was 11th. Kansas State was 25th. Cincinnati was 31st. Baylor was 49th. And Central Florida was 61st. So 8 of their opponents were inside of that number. And if you look at the average power ranking for their defenses being around 51, you're starting to creep towards the bottom end of the Power 5 with that average number there. So 3 of their opponents in Oklahoma State 103, Arizona 87th, and Texas Tech 81st. In those 3 contests, they went 2-1. So beat up on some of the weaker teams on the schedule. When they stepped up in competition, we saw some struggles there. We talked about, if I had to bullet point their offense really quickly before I get into the numbers, strong ground game, but a passing game that absolutely struggled. So the average team last year scored about 28 points per game. This offense was at 28.5, but when we adjust for opponent, actually goes up to 30.2, so almost a 2-point per game improvement when we adjust for opponent. Their passing yards, average team last year threw the ball for about 227 yards per game. West Virginia was at 200, and basically that same number when we adjust for opponent. The ground game, average team last year rushed for about 160 yards per game. West Virginia was at 193. When we adjust for opponent, that number goes up over 200, 220 to be exact, almost a 28-yard per game improvement when we adjust for opponent. As far as their total offense goes, led by that dominant ground game, their total offense, 393 yards per game in total offense. When we adjust for opponent, that goes up to 420. Team balanced as far as the offense goes, but you would love to see more production out of your offense when you have a ground game going that well. Now, let's take a look at these 3 numbers here. The average team finish their drives with either a touchdown or a field goal on about 40%. West Virginia was at 50.6, whether they were getting field goals or touchdowns. Now, drives ending with a touchdown, that number's about 28.7%. West Virginia was at 39.3, putting up points, right? We'll get to that. And then third down conversion. Average team last year was about 39%. When we adjusted those out, West Virginia converting on third downs at 45.9%, so almost 46% on third downs. Average team last year gave up about 23.5 sacks on the regular season. West Virginia allowed 26. Turnovers. You want to know why a team that is scoring that often in the end zone on their drives, but is not averaging well over 30 points? Because they committed 17 turnovers last year. Now, we talk about our 3 E's on these podcasts, how effective, explosive, and efficient this team's offense was. Let's take a look at those numbers. As far as the effectiveness, West Virginia was 17th best in the country. As far as being explosive, only 43rd in that category. As far as being efficient, they were 31st. So West Virginia ended the regular season for us as the 29th best offense in college football last year. Now let's take a look at the caliber of offenses that the Mountaineers defense went against last year. And before I do, let me just recap the offensive numbers here. This rushing attack was very effective. As I mentioned, almost 200 yards per game rushing. Had 3 players rush for over 700 yards last year. Jaheim White went for 844. C.J. Donaldson and the quarterback Garrett Green went for 734. This trio alone averaged 180 yards rushing per game. We talked about the weaknesses, the passing game lacking consistency, about 200 yards per game passing. Quarterback Garrett Green really struggled with protecting the ball last year. 12 INTs and a 3.8 interception percentage. This is not winning football from the quarterback spot. Talking about a quarterback that completed 60% of his passes, 15 passing touchdowns, 12 INTs. Now let's talk about the defense here. How many of those opponents' offenses ranked inside of the top 68? Well, Penn State was 48th. Pitt was 65th. Kansas was 23rd. Oklahoma State was 57th. Iowa State was 16th. Kansas State was 29th. Cincinnati was 42nd. Baylor was 7th. UCF was 24th. Texas Tech was 9th. Folks, 10 of their opponents were inside of that number. Outside of their FCS opponent in Albany, only Arizona, which was 75th, was outside of that top 68. So week in and week out, this defense was going up against a gauntlet. When you average out their opponent's power ranking, 36, you were facing nearly a top 30 offense every single week. Defense struggled, major struggles, but when you look at who they were playing week in and week out, maybe a little bit justified in some of those struggles. Now, let's take a look at their points per game allowed. 31.1 points per game allowed, but when we adjust for opponent, as I mentioned, that goes down a full touchdown to 23.9 points per game. 7 points per game improvement when we adjust for opponent. The passing, now, this is what I talked about when you adjust for opponent. The numbers show that this defense gave up 270 yards per game through the air. But when we adjust that out for opponent, it goes down to 214 yards per game. That's a 55-yard difference there. speaks to the caliber of offenses, as I mentioned. The rush defense also slightly improves, goes from 141 yards per game allowed to 118 when we adjust for opponents. 24-yard per game improvement. In their total defense, folks, you're talking about almost an 80-yard differential as far as improvement goes. The raw number says that this defense gave up 410 yards. When we adjust for opponent, it goes to 331 yards per game. Now, let's talk about the three components here. Scoring defense. Opponents were scoring either a field goal or a touchdown on 38.7% of their drives, so a little bit better than what the average is. Now, here's where it flips. Drives ending in touchdowns, instead of that 28.7% that I mentioned, their opponents were finding the end zone 35.7% of the time. That's how you give up 31 points per game. And then third down defense could not get off the field. Instead of that 39% that teams average on third downs, West Virginia's opponents were converting at a 42.7% clip. Yeah, not good. This team also struggled getting after the quarterback. Only 18 sacks last year, so about almost 5 less than what the average team should have been at. And as far as not being able to get off the field, this team was absolutely horrible on fourth down defense. Their opponents converted 11 out of 15 attempts last year, 73% conversion rate. Team also struggled to force turnovers, only 11 forced turnovers last year. When we look at the 3 E's on defense, as far as being effective, not allowing explosive plays, and being efficient, all outside of the top 75 in all 3 of those categories. 91st in effective defensive ranking, 97th in explosive defensive ranking, meaning, folks, big plays were given all over the place against this defense last year. As far as efficiency, 84th in college football last year. This team finished the regular season for us as the 92nd ranked defense last year. This is why you finished year 6-6 in the regular season. Now, let's talk about the coaching situation, coaching and situational play and special teams. Let's start with the special teams. Reliable, but not game-changing. Now, the field goal kicking was absolutely excellent, converting 92% of their field goal attempts. Did not miss a single extra point. Their punting average did absolutely hurt them. 41.8 yards per punt. That's outside of the top 75 in that number. As far as coaching in one-game situations, this team was 3-1 in one-score games, but against quality opponents, they were 3-5. Did a good job of not committing a lot of penalties, only 4.9 penalties per game, or about 38 penalty yards is where we're sitting at. As far as fourth down aggressiveness, this team, well, this head coach, Neil Brown, out of 144 Division I coaches, he was the 4th most aggressive head coach going for it on fourth downs, 36, but only converted 21 of those. So a conversion rate of 58%, but maybe a little bit too aggressive. Let's talk about what went wrong for this team last year. And I already mentioned the quarterback play really struggling. Garrett Green, in 11 games, he only threw for 2,300 yards, 7.3 yards per attempt. You're not pushing the ball down the field. Barely over 200 yards per game passing from the quarterback, certainly not good enough. And when we talk about the wide receiver production, or certainly lack thereof, their leading receiver, Hudson Clement, in 12 games, had 51 receptions, 741 yards, 14.5 yards per reception, and 5 touchdowns. Folks, your leading receivers averaging 62 yards per game receiving. You're not making any big plays there. When I take a look at how this team performed offensively and defensively when they won compared to when they lost. So in their 6 wins during the regular season, this offense was averaging 35 points per game. Now, only attempting 22 pass attempts per game. Keep that in mind. 197 yards per game passing, 9.1 yards per attempt, almost 14 yards per completion. The ground game, 42 rushing attempts for 223 yards per game rushing. This team was averaging about 5.3 yards per rushing attempt, 6.6 yards per play. This team was averaging 4 touchdowns per game when they won, less than a turnover when they lost. Their run pass ratio was 66% run, 34% passing. Third down conversion, they were converting about almost 47% on third downs, almost 80% on fourth downs. Team only committed 4 turnovers when they lost. When they won. Now let's take a look at the games when they lost. 6 of those in the regular season, so pretty balanced there. This offense was only averaging 21.7 points per game, almost 2 touchdowns difference there. They were throwing the ball significantly more, almost 34 passing attempts per game, yet the yardage didn't improve with that. Only goes up to 204 yards passed per game. The yards per attempt drops down significantly, only 6.1 yards per passing attempt, 10.9 yards per completion. The rushing attempts stayed about the same, about 40 rushing attempts per game, dips down to 163 yards per game rushing, 4.0 yards per rushing attempt. They were converting on third downs at a 39% clip in their losses. Their fourth down conversion goes down to 45%. Now, here's something else that I'm going to point out with this team. They attempted 14 fourth down attempts in those wins, attempted 22 in the losses. 13 committed turnovers in those losses. So the difference between this offense when they won and lost, about 14 more points per game, about 3 yards per passing attempt, 60 more yards rushing per game, averaging about 1.3 yards per rushing attempt better in those wins. We talked about it. Team just could not find the end zone when they won and committed significantly more turnovers when they lost. Not surprising. Let's take a look at the defense here. From a defensive standpoint, this team, when they won, allowed 21 points per game. Opponents were throwing the ball about 30 attempts per game. 240 yards, 8 yards per pass attempt, 13.7 yards per completion. Their opponents were running the ball about 34 times per game for 127 yards, 3.7 yards per rushing attempt. And this defense forced 9 turnovers in those wins. In the 6 losses, points per game allowed goes up to 41, so almost a 3 touchdown differential there. Their opponents threw the ball about the same attempts, 30 times per game. but the yards per game goes up to 298 yards per game, 9.9 yards per attempt, so almost 2 yards more per passing attempt. The rushing attempts stay the same. The rushing yardage goes up to about 156 yards per game in those losses, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. But in those 6 losses, this team only forced 2 turnovers. So the difference when they lost compared to when they won, they were giving up, like I said, almost 20 points per game less. About let's call it about 58 yards per game passing, fewer yards passing, about 29 yards per game rushing. So this defense was giving up about 87 yards fewer in those wins compared to when they lost. And we talked about it. Could not generate turnovers and could not offset their offense absolutely turning the ball over. Their offense, as I said, committed 13 turnovers in those losses. Defense only forced 2. That was pretty much the microcosm for this team last year. So what went wrong? Weak pass defense against high-level quarterbacks last year. I mean, the numbers absolutely bear that out. When you look at the games that they lost, they were going up against much better quarterbacks. Too many 4th down conversions allowed, and inconsistent offensive execution in those losses. So what is the final grade for the West Virginia Mountaineers in 2024? We're going to give the West Virginia Mountaineers a grade of a B-. Why? The strong running game, discipline, very few penalties, effective at times in close games. Weaknesses: pass defense struggle, lack of offensive explosiveness, and struggle against quality opponents. The final verdict: West Virginia had a solid season but struggled against top competition. Their run game was a major strength, but defensive inconsistencies and a lack of passing game effectiveness held them back to a better record. So what does this team need to do in 2025 to improve? First and foremost, they got to improve the pass defense, particularly against the deep throws. Teams were liking those longer breaking routes, probably because you couldn't get a quality pass rush against your opponents in those contests. Key number 2, they got to find more offensive explosiveness in the passing game in 2025. Once again, as I mentioned, Garrett Green absolutely struggled with taking care of the ball, but also pushing the ball down the field. You're talking about 15 touchdowns to 12 INTs, a yards per attempt of 7.3, not going to get it done. Key number 3, this team must continue to build on a strong rushing attack. If West Virginia can improve in these 3 areas, West Virginia can push for an 8-win season in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.